So with any kind of sheets, Excel or Google Sheets, it's always handy to be able to name your ranges because you can then reference them whenever you're working with any kind of formulas and calculations and things. So let's take a look at what that is going to look like here in a Google Sheet that I've got. Here I've got a mock list of, quiz results from a class that doesn't exist. And in, say, this column as an example, I've got scores. Maybe I want to just count up all those scores. So I could come over here and I could use the count formula. I could say count, open bracket, and it wants to know what values am I going to count up. Well, I could just sort of grab all these cells and hit enter, and it would tally them up for me, tell me there's 16 cells there with data in them. But then when I come back and look at this later, and I'm looking at that formula thinking, well, geez, where's C2 and C18? It does highlight it for me, certainly, but it's more flexible, easier to work with if I actually name that range that I'm referencing. So whenever I select any cells or even just click in a single cell, I'm going to see up here in what they call the name box the actual cells that I'm referencing here. But instead of leaving it at C2 to C17, I can click into that space and I'll just call it scores. Hit enter. Now, when I come back up to that name box and I click it, it's actually a little drop-down list and I see scores. Click it, and it highlights that range again for me. So, in terms of a formula, I'm just going to say equals count, open, and I can just type the word scores. Close that bracket and hit enter. It's going to give me that same count. So, simple enough there. Let's make it a little more interesting by looking at this data I've got here, because of course I want to know which student gave me all these responses. Their email address is going to help me. But down here I have another sheet. I can click that tab, and over here I'm going to see my list of students here. This is my class list that I've created for myself. So I'm going to take this class list, highlight those cells, and I'm going to call them up here my class. Enter. And now I've named that range of cells. Even if I start inserting more data in here, adding more students to that list, it'll still work just fine. So I come back to sheet 1. I click into that first cell, and I'm going to use what's called the VLOOKUP formula. This one allows you to vertically look up data somewhere else and bring it over to this location. So I say equals VLOOKUP, and this formula seems a little bit complicated. It's not really. It's asking right here, the first parameter is the search key. So what's it looking for? Well, it's looking for that right there. I want to look up that data, that email address, and try and find something that matches it. So, comma, the next thing it says is, all right, the range. Where am I going to go look for this data to match it up with something? Well, I already know the answer to that because I named it. You're going to look at my class. Comma. The next one it says is index. So the my class grouping is 2 columns. It could be 3 or 4 or 5. I could have all kinds of data on that other sheet potentially. What I want it to spit back at me is the name that it finds in column 2. So 2. Finally, the last one is an optional parameter here that says, is it sorted? Well, I don't know if it's sorted. I'm going to assume it's not sorted and just say false. That way I'm always safe with false. Even if it is sorted, it'll still work itself out and function correctly. So with that typed in there, I hit enter. And of course, Sheets is smart enough to say, hey, do you want to autofill this all the way down? Click. And now I've got all the student names loaded into my sheet here so I can figure out who exactly scored what on their test and how everybody did. So it's a handy way to use these named ranges and reference different cells within your spreadsheet. And next I'm going to make another video about importing ranges. So you can actually name ranges in one spreadsheet, and then with the import range function, bring that named range all the way over to a completely different spreadsheet to do the same kind of thing. That way you're only using one class list sheet and you're able to use it over and over and over with your kids all the time.